Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another great episode of our show. Want to start this with a quick question for you. Do you know how much your leave management really costs? Now, I'm not just talking about the wages or the different claims. Those numbers exist somewhere. You know you can go and search and find them. Really, I'm talking about everything else. The hours your HR team is absorbing, managing leave, the compliance exposure you may or may not have, the employee who came back from a leave and then 8 months later they have an exit interview and said nothing about what their leave experience really felt like, right? Those costs are also real, but they're just invisible. You can't go and search them and just pull them up, and invisible costs don't always get fixed. So to help me unpack all of these different costs that still show up but may not show up within your financial reports, I'm here once again with Tilt's Chief Revenue Officer Brandon Salisbury, who's going to help me walk through this conversation. So Brandon, welcome back. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Nick.
I feel like it's only fair if we start with the obvious here. We're talking about visible versus invisible costs. So let's start here. Let's have you walk us through the difference between a visible leave cost versus one that's invisible. And what are some examples of each?
Yeah, Nick, I love this topic. Obviously, I'm not an HR administrator. My title says it right there, right? So dead giveaway. But what I do come with is a perspective that's gained by having our team talks to leave administrators all day, every day. We
Mhm.
do a lot of research around this, attend conferences, and so a lot of the things that we'll walk through, like some of the costs that I'll talk about, really come from all of these conversations, kind of culminating into this question. With all the conversations that we're a part of, some of the very visible costs that, like you said, are right there. You can go search for them. Finance can help you find them. Are things like wages, claims. Anytime your HR team has to reach out to legal counsel, particularly if it's an outside counsel that they're reaching out to, they charge a hefty hourly rate, and so all of those kinds of costs are very visible. We're talking about invisible costs. We're talking about some of the things you mentioned, like the amount of time that HR spends. Like they don't just like clock in and out when they're just managing leave, so you don't always have a good tracking for how much time they're actually spending there. But those things add up. Every time they have to respond to an email, every time they have to answer questions over the phone, that Slack message they get, the Teams message they get, where their day's interrupted, the cost of context switching there plays into that. You also have other invisible costs like manager bandwidth, compliance exposure that hasn't really surfaced yet. The invisible costs don't really have a category. They don't always get assigned a dollar value. They may not necessarily show up in your CFO's ledger, but they're real and they're super impactful.
Absolutely. And there's something here that you just touched on, which is the aspect of compliance. From my angle, it seems like compliance is probably one of the highest stakes invisible costs that comes up. What actually happens when leave compliance breaks down from this point? And what does that end up costing an HR organization?
I love the topic of compliance as like this invisible cost, right? Again, in all of our conversations with multiple companies a day around this, we talk about like, what's the ROI? Like, what are these costs? And anytime compliance comes up, and that compliance as an ROI factor comes to CFOs, a lot of times it's kicked back, right? Because it's an anticipatory cost, it's a hypothetical cost, something that hasn't always necessarily hit them yet. Sometimes it kind of gets like minimized, right? Like
Mm.
they don't take that seriously. But the reality is that when there's a breakdown in compliance, there are some real costs there, and that comes from like compliance errors stemming from manual processes, like maybe the wrong leave is applied. Um, Perhaps there's missed notice windows, miscalculated pay, which can cost you in other ways as well. That exposure that exposure continues to grow. It's always growing. Anytime a company is engaged with multi-state workforces, anytime they add or anytime they're adding more leave types, whether voluntarily or through state regulations, more becomes you also continue to see more regulatory complexity every year, changes to laws, how laws work together, things like that. And so if compliance breaks, those are all areas of exposure. If compliance breaks, what it results in is violations and lawsuits, right? Those are likely fast follows to those types of breakdowns. And lawsuits don't just stem from worst case scenarios. They can come from something as
Mhm.
small as a notification that came up a day too late. Obviously, the goal here is minimizing those compliance gaps to limit your exposure.
Yeah, that's such a good point when you say compliance concerns aren't just from like the worst of the worst cases. Like if someone or an HR leader has a leave process that is okay, like it's had a clean record, it doesn't mean that it's really built to the test. And they might see these cases in the news or wherever, and it's like, oh, that would never happen to me. But like you said, all it takes is for one small thing to stem, and now you have a whole new compliance breakdown issue that you don't have to sort through. But there's also another cost that sometimes is also hard to put a number on is what happens to an employee during a leave that, let's say, doesn't go well in this case. When this happens, why does that matter from a financial standpoint and not just from a cultural standpoint or from an HR's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, there's obvious like invisible costs that come culturally, but when we speak just like financially, the thing that we have to remember is that leave is very generally very personal. Like
Mhm.
it's not like PTO, right? Like leave is generally taken in like critical life moments, for better or for worse, right? They can be for very happy reasons. They can also be for very very unhappy reasons. And so when an experience is disorganized or unclear, that breakdown breaks trust in a way that's hard to rebuild, right? Like you don't get a lot of at bats here. If it's broken, you may not get another opportunity. And so, knowing that, a poor leave experience leaving that bad taste in that employee's mouth could, like we mentioned, cause that employee to look somewhere else, look to work somewhere else, and uh, let's face it, like turnover is expensive, and it traces directly back to the leave experience when oftentimes an exit interview may say something else, right? They may not explicitly call out the leave experience, but there's signs there that point to that being really the root cause. Just recently, a report that I saw, SHRM stated that the cost of replacing an employee can range anywhere from 50 to 200% of their salary, right? And so you take an employee with $100,000 salary, you're looking at it, just from one employee's turnover, potentially a $200,000 cost. And so
Mhm.
cost is real. There's not just the cost of actually replacing the employee, but the sunk cost of the work that person's not getting done because there's no one in that seat to do the work. And so there's real cost there. And that generally ties back to just something gone wrong in the lead process.
For sure. And I think it's also fair to say that HR is absorbing most, if not almost all of this between the admin, the compliance work that they need to make sure their leave processes go through, the employee support, all of it is generally routed to them. What does that look like in terms of real time, like the HR time cost? Why should they care about that as a business cost?
Yeah, managing lead manual is very time intensive in ways you know many times are hard to overstate. Right, every case requires coordination across HR, managers, payroll, sometimes legal, and HR is the one that's kind of that has to hold all of this together. Right, like they own this process. And that time has a cost, even when it doesn't necessarily appear as a line item in the budget. Um, but along those lines, like the opportunity cost is also very real. Like every dollar spent on leave admin is an hour not spent on retention, culture, and strategic work. And aside from that, a lot of HR managers or leave administrators that we talk to in this area, it's a source of burnout for that person too, right? Like it's taking them a lot of extra time, oftentimes requiring them to work longer hours when these leave cases come up, and it's a true source of burnout even for the leave administrator. And so being able to like retention isn't just the employees going out on leave, but it's also, a very real thing with the employees that are administering leave. And so, that opportunity cost, extends, that time cost, that opportunity cost extends even beyond the things that you see there with the impactful strategic things that HR is carrying out. It also truly impacts HR as well.
Brandon, let's say that there's an HR leader that is watching this, and let's say they've never mapped out these invisible costs before. Like they know that these things exist, but maybe they don't have a number associated to this. How do they begin to see the full picture? Where should they start?
I'd start with the basics, right? Like just looking at how many leaves you administered over the last year, or even start with the leaves that you're starting to administer now, and look at how many hours per case that you're spending on those leaves, and then also like how much or how many errors were made that required some sort of rework, so additional time spent. And then I think if you layer that in with some downstream questions like, were there any compliance issues? Like, were there things that were flagged that were out of compliance? Did you have to reach out to counsel to get advice on how to handle situations? And then also, just keeping track of like what your turnover looks like your post leave turnover rate. Like how long do people generally stay on average? How many people even return to work versus don't? By doing all of those things, layering those things in, I think the goal is to give really a complete picture that you can act on, but also, start to formulate the business case for getting help from the rest of your leadership team.